Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn Senior News Editor for Job Searches and Careers, and the editor behind the Get Hired and Get Ahead newsletters. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so happy you're here today. We have these conversations every Friday, and I'm just so happy that you picked today to join us. So before we get started, I want to ask, as always, that you introduce yourself in the comments. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and a little bit about your job search and career. I already see a lot of people jumping into the comments. We have Rodney, Ingrid, Nirmala, Shelley from the UK. So keep introducing yourselves, and we will be looking at all of your introductions. And also give us your questions. Tell us if you have any job search questions, any questions about your careers. And then what I want you to do is interact with each other. The cornerstone of a successful job search, and really to a lot of career success, is networking. And what better time to start than right now? So what you could do is find someone who maybe lives in your area or works in your region or your territory, or even just in your industry or field, and connect with each other. If you're looking for a job, maybe someone's looking to move to a job in your field, or maybe they are looking to move to your area of the world, and you could job search together or swap some tips. Really, some of the best conversations that I hear of happen after these shows, when people connect with each other and help each other with their job searches or career plans. So keep introducing yourselves, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And of course, like I said, please keep adding your job search questions and questions about your careers, because we're going to be getting to those in just a bit. And we really have such a wonderful guest today. She is the CEO and founder of Workin. We have Haley Sudbury. Welcome so much, Haley.
Hi, thanks for having me, Andrew.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I guess, can we start off by can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and also your company, and why you founded it and what you do?
Sure. So obviously, I'm Haley. I founded Workin with my co-founder, Angela Newell, to initially really change someone's experience inside an organization. My own personal story, as I was having, I guess, a bit of a career crossroads in my own life, was actually, I was about to come out as gay. I was looking around the company I was working at, and I couldn't see this version of myself. I couldn't see this senior leader above me to kind of aspire to. And I wondered kind of, who I would be in the corporate world as like gay Haley. What did that mean? And so it really kind of took me on a bit of a journey to think a lot about, what the career journey is like as you're moving through it. And actually, as you're really wanting to be your whole self, how do you reconcile all of that inside an organization, inside company culture? And so really, that whole experience, which is a longer experience than we have time to kind of delve into right now, was really at the very foundation for founding Workin. And Workin's mission was really about changing kind of who you would see and what you would do in an organization to support someone's career. And the goal was to make it really easy for senior leaders and managers to see everybody walking all different lived experiences, and be able to support their journey through mentoring and career development. And so that's where Workin really started, with the idea of making also underrepresented talent much more visible to senior leaders and managers. And now we've really progressed Workin into much more around helping companies on their business growth journey overall, which kind of people are kind of key to that, and also helping individuals with their own career journey and being able to, think about what development looks like for you as an individual as well.
Definitely. And, we have so many people joining us from all over the world. So I'm sure that resonates with them. We have Jonathan from New York, Ankit from India, Natalie from Washington, D.C., Kyle from Houston, Teresa from Wyoming, Alicia from North Carolina, Henry from Connecticut. We have Herman from Holland, Rabia from Atlanta. So we have people from all over joining us. And can you tell us a little bit about sort of how you work with companies then? So sort of how does that process work for the companies when you get in there and someone says, hey, we need help?
Yeah, so a lot of times it starts with just this kind of understanding of, hey, we're not maybe doing all that we can, or, things have been changing a lot. We're moving into hybrid working right now, and we're not sure how to, really support people's experience around getting into this new kind of working world of a mix of office and home. Or, people are feeling disconnected and they're needing a little bit more than the Zoom call to, allow them to feel connected into the company and be clear around kind of, what the plan for their future is. The other area we've also worked a lot with companies on is really around supporting their employee resource groups, to actually think about, what sort of programs can they put in place. For example, their women's network, their LGBTQ networks, their various kind of diversity networks we'll also support as well, to make sure that a company is really able to deliver something of meaning internally for their people as well. So, moving it from kind of, the sponsorship of, say, maybe a Pride event that's happening externally for customers, but thinking about an experience you can bring internally, for your people, to show that you're serious and you have, real intention about, supporting individuals from a range of lived experience inside the organization. So we'll often just start with doing kind of a broad audit around where the company's at, or sometimes we'll get a panicked call around, hey, recognize we haven't been doing this stuff well, where do we start? And we really look to start with a program that actually can add value to the individuals they're looking to show that they want to support.
Yeah, and obviously that's a very big task. And I'm sure you become even more busy over the past year, because so many companies I know, just looking at our data, LinkedIn has become increasingly invested and interested in D&I and hiring experts to focus on that area. And, for people who are job searching or employers out there, there's always that idea of, obviously, D&I is very altruistic. It makes the workplace better for everyone. But beyond that, why should people worry about diversity and inclusion? Because obviously there's been a lot of research into this, and it goes just beyond that altruism, right?
It does. And I mean, look, I think, for a long time there, we looked at so many business cases around kind of the D&I, the reasons for D&I. And actually we are so far past that now. We know that actually diverse leadership actually outperforms, non-diverse leadership. And, it's really become a lot more of a business imperative. I think where we've actually seen, I guess, the world change over the last year with the pandemic, the actual Black Lives Matter, was actually just this realness around inequalities that existed in the world, and actually people getting a real sense around the change they wanted to see from the companies that they actually purchase from as well. So thinking about where I put my money, and that, my dollar has power, and I want to actually put that into something that aligns to my values. If I'm an ally of a particular community, I also want to make sure that, my communities are supported, that I'm an ally of, not just a member of. And so that's really where I think, the world has changed, in the sense of, it's not really separate anymore. It's actually, the people that work for you are also your consumers. So as a business, you need to be thinking about actually what you stand for, and actually the actions that you're actually part of, whether that be for your customers or for your people. There's less of a line between customers and people, and I think because of that, it's become much more important for companies to be thinking about. And actually, I think just the general job searcher as well, is looking to make sure that the company that they work for, where they spend their time, is actually aligned to their personal values. And, we're certainly seeing people actually look a lot more closely around what a company stands for and what are they doing. And in that's not just about a marketing campaign, actually diving deeper into, what are they sharing on social, where are donations going? What does their board look like? What does their leadership team look like? Is it a diverse mix of people? And it's pretty easy to now find out this information too, quite quickly on a company.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people, especially if you fall into a group that's typically underrepresented in the workplace, or not necessarily historically supported, you can sort of look at a company, get in there, and maybe feel sort of otherized. And how do you suggest people investigate the commitment to diversity at a company? Because obviously you look on their website and you probably will find a diversity statement, and that's always nice and wonderful, but whether that's put into practice is another question. So should they be investigating the board, like you said, and also try and dig up donations and things like that?
I think so. And it's also about seeing, what actually exists inside the company. So if there's employee resource groups, for example, these are groups that are run, by the people, for the people. And so it's pretty easy to find out if a company of a particular size, I mean, sometimes in, micro companies, when you're sort of in the sort of 1 to 10 size, this is a little bit too small to have lots of different groups, given, there's just a very small population. But certainly in the larger organizations, employee resource groups are pretty common, and actually it's pretty easy to find out whether they exist or not. Often that information will be available on the company website as well. And that also just demonstrates that, the company is committed to supporting a variety of lived experiences of people that actually work for them as well, and is putting both money and time behind that. And that's very much the start of, is there something happening internal, which is a very real commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that's separate to some of the external stuff we might see coming up in the marketing campaigns.
Yeah, and we have Jonathan in the comments who said the more aligned one is with the values of an organization, the more one can contribute and achieve to the organization. I think that's true. And we have a question here about sort of how companies can provide equal playing fields. And, what do you think about, how can companies, who want to work on their D&I efforts actually sort of create that space? Is it about an equal playing field, or, how is that done at a company level? And that question's from Asha.
Sure. Thanks, Asha. I mean, look, there's a few kind of steps to this as well. I mean, one, there is the recruitment process. And a lot of companies now, I mean, best practice is really, seen as looking at things like, blind recruiting. So you're actually taking components out of the resume, for example, in terms of, debiasing the recruitment process. But I think the key thing is really, what happens once someone, gets inside the organization? How do you actually help that be a really great experience? Because if I get in there and I can't see, in my example, another, LGBT person or another LGBT woman, I'm a bit like, wow, if it's a big company, wow, is this a place that I'm going to feel comfortable? I mean, as someone who identifies this way, are they moving through kind of the pipeline and getting promoted? And so, I'm looking for examples of, how I identify. And, one of the ways we've seen this work really well is making sure there's really that buddy or mentoring program in place to help someone, from day one when they step inside the organization. So you're really providing support. Again, this is actually really, connecting your people with your people, but actually looking at a process or technology to do that is one of the ways, it is an easy win. And there's lots of different ways. I mean, you could do it on a, Excel spreadsheet if you're small. If you're larger, you might want to use technology like we have at Workin to help with that. But if you're a job seeker, you should be looking for things like, how is that onboarding and that, employee experience once you get inside the organization, how is that supported? What are the things that are in place that make you feel like you can rock up and be the person that you are and feel really comfortable to be that, so you can actually just get on and actually deliver the work and hopefully, have a good time doing that as well.
Yeah. And, for people who are maybe inside companies, because I know I've been at an employer before that, when I looked out into the room, it was vastly white and male. And, it took a manager who wasn't, did not fit those parameters to come in and say, we need to fix this. So if there is someone who sort of looks and sees that, how do you suggest they push for that from management?
From management, I mean, I think it's about, I think it's also being able to take kind of this outside-in approach, which is hugely powerful. I mean, the modern workplace now and the modern business, which is going to be successful in 2021, has to have, I guess, real intention about how they're embracing things like an inclusion and diversity. And I think really by being able to have this conversation with management, if it is, a particular homogeneous group, for example, as Andrew just, used that example, it's being able to point to the market. I think currently we're sitting at like roughly almost 50% of the world's population in the next couple of years sort of under 24. We know that there's a huge amount of kind of variety in kind of how people now identify, particularly in that age group. And over the next sort of 5 years, we're looking at sort of 70% of the working world being millennials. And actually, that's also a group of consumers that are looking to actually buy from companies that have, inclusion and diversity at the heart. And it's just the imperative and it's the standard. So really, if you're looking to change the organization from the inside out, because it is, not quite as modern as maybe it should be, I'd be pointing to these very clear market stats around, hey, this is what consumers now look like. If we want to be a business that succeeds, we know that these are consumers that look at companies, they look at the values, they look at where they put their money, and they look at who they pay, so who they promote. Surely we need to be actually embracing this so that we can actually be a company that exists in the next 5 to 10 years. Because look, we all know the world has changed. And so if you've got a couple of these stats and a way to talk about, what the market now looks like, ultimately we know that, the market does drive behavioral change. And actually, if you're in business and you want to stay in business, you need to be able to engage with these consumers who, are a group of consumers that demand more.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And, one thing that I've heard recently are companies who are creating internal employee resource groups for older workers, which I think is a really interesting step. And we have a question here from Shelley, who says, those over 50 years old in the labor market are being left behind in the digital world. How does ageism play a role in diversity and inclusion efforts?
Well, look, I think, to your point, Andrew, it's true. This has become, another kind of, I guess, a pillar within the D&I strategy for most companies. What's interesting is it's sort of been hovering for a while. We've seen mental health now also become a very clear pillar within a D&I policy or platform for organization. It's definitely the same with age as well. And I would say, this is important as well, because we do know that actually, there's still an important consumer segment, and being able to connect with consumers who are over 50 is still, a very important, an important thing for business in terms of like understanding your customer, as well as actually seeing the importance of kind of those roles of mentors in terms of subject matter experts and knowledge management inside an organization. That's all sort of, super important stuff. But the reality is it's no different to, any of the other diversity pillars. And, I tend to think about this as like, how do you really have empathy and understanding for someone's lived experience by looking at sort of over 50 as, this is something we need to build empathy and understanding for. There's no reason why it should not be a clear pillar within the D&I, overall strategy for an organization.
Definitely. And I think more companies are realizing that there is value in having a diverse workforce, not just in terms of, what people traditionally think about diversity, but also across like the age spectrum and neurodiversity and things like that. I remember when I was a medical reporter calling up a doctor for an interview, and he was older, and he said he wasn't doing much because they literally hired him to do more complicated surgeries because all the younger surgeons did robotic surgeries. Oh. So they ended up realizing that they needed more older surgeons on their payroll so they could do these complicated surgeries. And I thought it was a great example of, why there needs to be that diversity of experience in a workplace.
Absolutely.
And, we have a question here from Ingrid, and obviously a lot of people search for jobs on LinkedIn, and thank you if you do. But what strategies would you suggest people look for when considering diversity and inclusion of a potential employer when they're looking on like a job board or LinkedIn?
So, LinkedIn, obviously a great tool, something I use constantly as well. And the great thing is there is so much data available, particularly in understanding who works at the company. And, I would just encourage you firstly to, if you have a clear target in mind, firstly of the company, it's very easy to go in and understand, who works there, look at even things like the length of tenure you can see, which gives you a sense around, do people stay? Is that important to you? I think even, a new feature LinkedIn now has with, you can actually choose to add your pronouns to your profile. And just seeing who's added pronouns in terms of like the leadership team or, the general kind of community, I think is a great indicator around, how is a company embracing these ways in which, in this case, we're allies to the trans community, but how are they embracing, who they are and how they want to project themselves in the world. And this is information that's all there. I think it's just about doing the due diligence as a job seeker to dive a little bit deeper and get a sense around how are people representing themselves.
Yeah, and going back to when we talked about sort of pushing for changes internally, we have a question from Lisa who asked, how can employees start resource groups when they are told it's not part of their job description? And probably there's probably often some sort of internal politics when it comes to taking on additional work. But what's your suggestion for people who want to start a group?
So I think firstly, wherever you're at in your career there, Lisa, I think there's an important point we get to when we work for companies. And that's really about kind of understanding, is it the right company for us in terms of like the career path and who we are and the opportunities that exist, or is there perhaps maybe a better fit for us as well? And it's only because of the point that you raised. I think, employee resource groups can happen in a very formal or informal way, and a good company, in my opinion, only encourages that, because it really, even if it's not formal, it really kind of enables people to connect and build relationships and connections within kind of, I guess, again, under the banner, if you like, of the company that you work for. But it's only ever, a positive thing, and how it builds community and support. And that sort of support, particularly, this time that we've come through as well, is really important. I think actually what we need as humans. So I would say to you, there's a much bigger issue at play if there's not support for an employee resource group, because it is seen as, it's seen as one of the standards now. And I think, if there's not support there for that, you could definitely look to build a case for it in terms of like what I spoke about, earlier, in terms of understanding customers and why that's important, and how we can bring kind of outside information, inside the organization. I mean, another example I sometimes use is, so one of the best in class examples is Spotify, for example, work with their LGBTQ employee resource group to actually develop products for the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that is hugely powerful in the sense of like, hey, we've got this group, but also we're thinking about it in terms of, how we operate as a business. And so if I was you, I'd be looking at making that correlation between the value that an employee resource group could bring for, external and customer facing as well as internal, because those two things together are very powerful. And then after that, if that is not accepted, I mean, I'd probably just pop back over to LinkedIn and get a new job if I was you. That's my advice.
And, if someone does run into a lot of resistance and I assume, if someone sees the need for an employee resource group or support in that way, they're probably not alone in that company. So how would you suggest people maybe find that support internally if it's not necessarily coming from management? Should they try to create their own little groups, like create lunch gatherings, or what would your suggestion be for people who maybe they don't have the management support yet?
So yeah, I'd definitely look to do it informally first. But the other thing you could do, if you did form some sort of lunch club, for example, you could invite an external speaker in. I mean, I sort of, or people in my team get these invites all the time as well, particularly when companies or people are looking at starting employee groups for the first time, and they're really reaching out to organizations to say, hey, look, we'd love to hear from you around how to do this. And so I would encourage you to look for somebody who, I guess, identifies in the way for the group that you're looking to establish, and invite them into your organization to give an informal talk, organize a Zoom call. if anything, it's only positive from the company in terms of like engaging with thought leaders from, I guess, the business world. But it's also a way that you can actually get some information to help, shape this idea of what an employee resource group could look like. And you can do it in a way that is, easy and free in the first instance. And then if there's appetite, you could maybe look at getting some resource to, help you, set it up. But, look externally. What does good look like? Who do you want to hear from? If it's a women's group, who's a woman entrepreneur you want to bring in? If it's an LGBT leader, who's an interesting leader doing interesting stuff, and who's shouting about things on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, and reach out to them as a starting point. If they can't do it, they'll probably refer you to someone who can. So I'd look to bring that outside in approach. It's always fresh and interesting as well if you can do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always so wonderful and genuine when you see employees take an actual interest and care in helping their coworkers. So it's always really nice to see employee resource groups succeed, and especially see the leaders of those groups internally, at least for me.
And me too.
And we have a question from Rabia, which is, how do we work towards changing systemic biases within organizations? And is that, does that again go back to, like you said, look at the numbers, and because I assume systemic biases, like they go deeper than that. It's mostly than just having the head count. It's about processes.
It is. Look, this is a big one, and it's a minefield, not going to lie. I mean, talk briefly about, looking at how you could de-bias processes that existed, like recruitment and blind recruiting, and how do you kind of look at the processes that your organization uses. But look, I think with biases, ultimately, I think it's much bigger than that. And something I've been talking to a lot of CEOs about is really this idea of beliefs. And, what are your beliefs as a leader? What are the beliefs that are in your organization? Maybe the ones that you really know about and the ones that you don't, the ones that are just kind of inferred. And the reality, unless we sort of come back to this around what we believe and what we stand for, and often, they pull through to our values, which we take time to articulate. But if we don't actually spend some time as leaders and as influencers in an organization thinking about, look, what are the beliefs that are here? And we don't look to address them, then we won't create change. And I think if we can actually start having a conversation around, hey, what do we believe in here? What do we stand for? We can actually start to address some of this with intention. Because I think, with biases, and I'm so sorry, I'm just getting a delivery now of something I've been waiting for about a week.
No worries.
But that's good. That's being dealt with in the background. So, it's a nice little interlude there. But I think, the belief piece is huge. And I think if you can find the way to address this with intention and really be thinking about, even what are your own beliefs, and then start, look at that as a starting point. Because sometimes we don't come back to these even as adults. And if we don't address some of this stuff, which I think has been linked to biases, but it's too easy to say, look, don't worry about that. It's just an unconscious bias, or that's a blind spot. I think it's easy to not be accountable. But if we think about what our beliefs are, and that is a conversation you start to have with yourself, your leaders, and your organization, you can actually start to take some of this stuff a bit more head on with intention. And that would be my advice around having it, getting real, having the belief conversation.
Yeah, and congrats on you for not losing your train of thought.
Oh, thank you. I was like, oh, that new camera's finally arrived.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm waiting for a package myself. And we have a question here, and part of something that I've stumbled upon over the past few years is the focus that a lot of HR departments and also HR leaders are putting on job descriptions too, to make sure that they don't necessarily turn away applicants because of gender language or anti-age language. And we have a question from Muriel, who says basically that companies give out the notion that they want employees who are under 30 but with 15 years experience. So is this an area that you've seen companies working on? And also, is there any tricks that you would suggest people follow when they're looking at a job description, so they're not necessarily turned away if they do run into a word where they see digital native or something that may skew younger, or maybe it might be a little bit racist even?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one. A lot of conversations I've had with companies, people have been working on this really for the last couple of years. This is not a new area where, companies are making sure that they want to get the language right, because ultimately they want, the biggest talent pool, possible to tap into. So it's definitely not about, getting 2 applicants, it's about getting 200. And so, from a company's perspective, it's absolutely key to make sure the language is there so it actually is attractive and, but also open and inclusive. So there's been a hell of a lot of work there. In terms of thinking about it from a candidate perspective, I think, we know all, the issues around kind of, women and men and the way they look at kind of opportunities, being able to sort of fully do a role or, 70%. But that really comes down to, what's important to you and actually thinking about, it's okay if you can't do everything that's on the job description, looking at what that you can, translate your skills into actually maybe more contemporary language as well. There's certainly a time that we all need to update that, even with the 15, 20, 30 years experience. We do need to bring it into today's terms so that we are relevant. And that doesn't matter, about age. That's about actually making sure your skills are presented in a way that is received and appropriate for business today. And so, as a candidate, you may even want to work with a professional, from even a PR perspective, in terms of how do you adapt what you've done for today's marketplace. And, I think that those two things are kind of working together. I think it all works in our favor. It's certainly, starting to be a frothy job market in the US. So, but the reality is, if we don't present ourselves in a way that is relevant, the HR person or the recruiter isn't necessarily, it's not their job to do the work for you and actually, take that leap. As a candidate, you have to look at ways that you can close any gaps and you can show how what you have is relevant today. And I think that's about, good PR, marketing and comms, all the things that companies have. We need to think about that for us as individuals as well.
Yes, that's why a lot of times people call resumes and cover letters your marketing materials.
Well, it is.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Haley. I appreciate you sharing so much advice and knowledge with us. And I hope people were following along and following you on LinkedIn and getworkin.com.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a real pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And, if you're ever looking for more information about the world events, always come back to the LinkedIn news page, because we have something here all the time for you. New stuff being posted by my wonderful colleagues on the LinkedIn news team. In fact, coming up Monday, my colleague Nina Melendez will be talking to 2 experts about the supply shortages hitting the economy and what that means for the prices. And that's at 3 p.m. Eastern time on the LinkedIn news page right here. So if you've been to Starbucks recently and you realize that they're out of cups or coffee, you'll find out why on Monday. And then obviously every Friday, I'm here with a new guest. And on Friday, I will be joined by Tejal Wagadia on Get Hired Live. She's a recruiter and one of the 2020 LinkedIn top voices in job searches and careers. That's Friday, June 18th at 12 p.m. So if you ever want to know what happens behind the scenes of the hiring process, Tejal will be able to tell us a little bit about that, actually a lot about that, since she's incredibly knowledgeable and wonderful, and you should be following her on LinkedIn as well. So come back on Friday. My producers will be posting in the comments the link, and it should be in the post above too. So you could RSVP, click the remind me button, and you'll get a notification when we go live. So until next week, please stay safe, follow your local health guidelines. Obviously, the pandemic is a different experience right now in many different parts of the world. If it's waning in one area, it's still going strong in others. So be careful. You could only get hired, you can only get a job if you're well enough and healthy enough to do so. So until next time, best of luck.